Good morning and welcome to this interview for Enlit Asia 365. We are on site today at Enlit Asia 2025 and I'm delighted to be joined by Jerin, who is Managing Director for Asia Pacific with Black & Veatch. Jerin, thank you very much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you so much for having me as well, sir.
You moderated one of our opening panels the other day that provided an international or perhaps more regional perspective on the direction of travel for the energy transition in Southeast Asia, and it helped to set the tone perfectly for the conversations we've had subsequently. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to get your reflections and also perhaps dig a little bit deeper into some of the themes raised, particularly from a Black & Veatch perspective. So going into my first question, from where you're approaching the energy transition with Black & Veatch and the experiences that you have both regionally and around the world, what perhaps were some of the more compelling or even unexpected takeaways from the conversation?
Right. Thank you, Simon. From the entire region there's a higher sense of urgency to find practical solutions to both balance out low carbon goals and the economic realities. Right, renewables is continuing to do well. We heard of success stories like the largest, the best facility anywhere in the world being deployed in the Philippines. There's been a good amount of capacity addition in the renewable space. But we also heard, that coal is an important baseload fuel. And there's a lot of conversations around how do we better utilize those existing resources with maybe with technology solutions like carbon capture or co-firing, but also the better utilization of assets, right? I think gas continues to remain a transition fuel. There are, of course, challenges in developing and deploying large-scale combined cycle power plants due to the current market realities. Well, that was also reflected. But I also heard and there have been a lot of exhibitors as well in Enlit Asia. There have been a lot of interesting conversations around digitalization, data analytics, and using demand side approaches towards the consumer as a tool to better manage the transition. So those are all very insightful.
Yeah. We had a lot of conversations over the last 3 days. One thing that has come up several times has been around that energy security piece and balancing it with the drive for decarbonisation. How does Black & Veatch approach this in Southeast Asia's power markets?
So Black & Veatch, we are very unique, right? So we are present across the asset lifecycle, right from the strategy stage to the project getting developed and eventual end of life decisions. So we are doing a lot of stuff with a lot of clients across the asset lifecycle. On renewables, we are working on one of the largest renewable energy developments in the region, where a large 2 gigawatt facility is being developed in a remote island, and it's more than just ground mounted solar. It's also about associated infrastructure getting that project done, right? So it includes jetties, it includes roads, it includes desalination facilities, it includes power evacuation infrastructure, and so it's about looking at these projects from beyond just a traditional solar facility to the whole infrastructure ecosystem that needs to go get developed. We recently delivered the Philippines' largest megawatt scale floating solar facility. And we are working with several clients across the region in trying to bring large renewable portfolios to life in the current market situation. On the gas front, we do a lot of work with liquefaction. We are working with Petronas for a liquefaction facility off the coast of Sabah. We've done several combined cycle power plants in the Philippines. We recently delivered 1.2 gigawatts as an EPC contractor, and in Thailand a couple of years ago about 1.4 gigawatts. But now we are also working in Malaysia and in Taiwan. And with the current market uncertainties, especially around the supply chain and the booming market in the US and in the Middle East, there's a lot of uncertainty regarding combined cycle power plant development in the region. So we are engaging very early on with the clients. These conversations need to happen very early on. And the understanding that it's more than just the turbines, right? Of course, all of us know that there are supply chain constraints around turbines, but it's also the other long lead items, right? And so, how do we look at practically de-risking the project or going beyond traditional EPC contracts to look at the best way to manage risk across the portfolio for both the client, the contractor, the suppliers. So it's a question of engaging early on some of these projects. And then coming back to existing assets, right, which is a large part of our conversation as well during Enlit. How do we better utilize some of these these existing resources? Does carbon capture offer a practical solution today? Is co-firing feasible, right? And then of course the whole grid piece and how do we use data better to better address the consumer requirements?
Yeah.
So those are some of the broad areas we are working on in the region.
Okay. Something that's come up really to the fore in the last few years has been cross-border interconnection. It's been talked about for some time, but really in the last few years, it seems to have some momentum behind it. It's always flagged as a crucial enabler of the energy transition here in Southeast Asia. What do you see as some of the main regulatory and technical barriers holding it back at the moment?
So I personally think that there's not a technical barrier, right? I don't think it is a technical issue because we are seeing that India, for example, has a large interconnected grid, right? The technology is available to all of the ASEAN market as well. We are also seeing it in the European Union, where there's an integrated grid available. We are also seeing examples of that within ASEAN, right? Where between these intercountry connections, the bilateral connections, they're all working well. So I think it's more of an issue of funding and the utilities better coordinating among themselves on the power development plans and then committing to some of these investments on those grid assets, going beyond just trying to find commercial value or immediate gains. I think there needs to be a commitment to make that happen. I don't think it's a policy issue as well, right? Or it may not be as much, right? We've heard from the ASEAN Center of Energy, right?
Yes,
And we know that the ASEAN countries are very committed to this, and there's a lot of government support to make this a reality. So
Okay. I want to go back to something you touched on in your first response to the opening question. The role of digital technologies and AI to manage grid tools was obviously touched on and has come up throughout the last few days. Where is Black & Veatch seeing the most traction and or interest from ASEAN utilities in this space?
So maybe I'll break it down, right? So there's of course the load side comments, right? So on the load side, there is AI and data center demand being coming onto the grid. And in fact, in the opening plenary, there were comments that the utilities don't have a high visibility of what's the power demand going to look like, right? And I think some of the effort needs to also come from the data center developers in engaging early on with the utilities, just like how power developers now engage with the utilities to make sure that things go onto the power development plan, right? So I think the data centers also need to give that visibility to these utilities because everyone is learning, right? And I think in today's situation, probably there's not enough information about how demand would look like in about 2, 3, 5 years time, right? And that's still evolving. So that's and we know it's coming, and we know that the demand is going to be high and heavy. We're seeing already that in developed markets as well. Then there's the use of AI for managing resources and managing assets, right? So we talked about digitization, we talked about digitalization, we talked about data analytics, and we talked about and also in the opening plenary we also talked about demand side management as an additional tool now. We talked about virtual power plants, we talked about flexible generation, and maybe consumer focused solutions that may help us better manage this transition.
I think I've heard demand side management come up more this year than I have in the last few years.
That's right.
Yeah. Given the pace of change and diversity across ASEAN, how do you see the role of private sector developers evolving in shaping energy transition outcomes?
So ASEAN is unique, right? We have large government-backed utilities that ensure security and reliability to both the grid and the power supply, right? So all of these are large institutions that ensure and protect the public interest, right? And then we have visionary power developers, private investors who are developing, for example, the Philippines, the largest, best infrastructure anywhere, or the 2 gigawatt facility on a remote island and adding 2 gigawatt capacity to the grid. And then now we are seeing newer players, right? Newer investors in the form of energy majors and data center operators coming into the market. So I think it's going to be a mix of both the public utilities in the traditional role, providing that security, that grid connection, that grid ability, the reliability, and then these private developers, and we've seen that they are the ones who've driven renewable adoption, right, in the region. So they have an amazing, they have an important part to roll, and probably the most important, especially as we consider transition and adoption of technologies.
Okay.
Right.
Jerin, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll let you get back to the show floor.
Sure. Thank you so much, Simon, for having me.
Cheers.
Thank you.